Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
All the way from Kangaroo Island, not quite space, mind you. Vicki, how are you? Nice of you to join us.
Good morning, Jeremy. Great to join you.
Hi, you well?
Absolutely. Sun shining.
What's it like on Kangaroo Island at the moment? I'll bet beautiful.
Beautiful, a bit windy, but, typical of this time of the year. Late January, early February, we get a few winds, sometimes some storms, but otherwise beautiful.
Les Ellicus is with me, and we were just talking a moment ago about the fact that the law always seems to lag behind technology. It's always trying to play catch-up, and there are always some casualties along the way. And I was telling Les that since leaving politics, you have taken on the role of, and I have never heard of a lawyer specialising in space. You'd have to be the first space lawyer, certainly in Australia, if not the world. What took you there?
Well, look, during office in the Parliament, Premier Stephen Marshall was very keen to get the Australian Space Agency set up in Adelaide, which he achieved in the first few months. And it sparked my continued interest because, of course, you and I are in the generation when we did watch man walk on the moon.
Yeah.
But Australia has essentially been out of the space industry for about 50 years. And it's really become very topical, of course, when I think Turnbull and then Morrison governments developed the passion for space and to be part of it, because the rest of the world, not just NASA in the United States or Roscosmos in Russia or the European Space Agency, which has got 9 countries in it, they've all continued. Other countries such as China and now even India are sort of in the space industry and race. So really, you and I remember exploration and man walking on the moon. But essentially, we have, of course, all of our communications reliant on space industries. Satellites, of course, is most commonly known. And, of course, we have an international space station up there which has a number of different tenants in it, including Russia and the United States. Yeah. And they continue to explore that fourth frontier. And so not only is, agriculture and in our communications, weather, observation, Earth exploration, etc., watching to see whether icebergs melt. There's lots of different applications of why we rely on space. So in of course, that time, in the last 50 or so years, there's been an unquenchable thirst for exploration. Yes. Not necessarily what we remember in the 60s, but to be able to achieve some new frontiers. And that is what is out there in space that could assist us, and not just in further communications, but if we're going to, as we now do, have missiles going through space, what are the rules and regulations about that? Yes. In addition to international treaties. So there's a whole, development happening, but there's also a bit of congestion happening up there in the lower Earth orbit. And so we need to start setting some extra rules, I think, in addition to our international treaties, as to how we share space. And there's lots, a little bit like the Antarctica Treaty. We have generally rules of, no mining and things of that nature in the Antarctica. We have to share space. We have to assist each other if we get into trouble. Those sorts of things in the treaty. And similarly in space, you have to rescue astronauts if you're up there and so on. So there's lots of areas that I suppose need to be advanced. And I think Australia now is in that medium of developing what we do. And of course, off that is not just the exploration and how we traverse space and occupy it, yes, and how we launch and return satellites and so on, but also new frontiers. China and Russia and the United States have all indicated a desire to have a settlement on the moon. There's talk of harvesting ice up there and converting it to oxygen and hydrogen.
But Vicki,
some of that is,
But Vicki, whose laws though? I mean, there are a lot of people competing.
Right, so the law of space largely relates on treaties. So we have international treaties which countries sign up to, and from that there are obligations of countries. States, as they're called in sort of the space law world, but countries to make sure that they regulate their own people. So we have Australian space laws which regulate when you can send up a satellite, what damages you have to pay if you cause problems along the way to other people in space, or of course to wildlife, anything else. So you've really got to look at a bit like we have all of the laws of air travel and when and how aircraft can traverse the within the first 100 miles, 100 kilometres or so up into space. So we've got this. We need to obviously relook at that, and Australia is now part of that. You're
talking, of course, about millions and millions of dollars to put stuff up there for one reason or another. It's sort of very high ticket price things. Say for example. And space junk is a big issue. There's a lot of it up there. What if somebody's space junk runs into my satellite that has cost me $10 million to put in orbit? I mean, do I go to a space lawyer and sue somebody?
You can try. The greatest difficulty in the law at present, and obviously you have obligations, of course, but there are breaches. So at the moment what happens is that if you put something up there, under Australian law, Australia is responsible basically for that, and other states whose citizens or companies might put something up there can be liable under the permit rules that the country then sets for the civilian or the company to actually launch. So if you run into someone else, I mean, the biggest difficulty at present, of course, is you've got to prove it. You've got to prove which bit of junk hit your space area and caused the damage. So there's all those things that happen, of course, that need to be considered. A lot of space junk, which is what is often talked about, of the residue of pieces of satellite, for example, up in the lower Earth orbit, which it might disintegrate, but some of it sits there and just goes round and round and round. And now satellites are very much smaller than what they used to be. So Elon Musk, for example, who's well known as a contractor in the space world, he might send up 300 satellites to provide a certain service, and they'll disintegrate when they're expired. So what do I do? There's some residue up there.
So what do we do if we get some space junk? I remember the Skylab. There was much controversy years ago when they were saying that the Skylab was going to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and what doesn't burn up is going to hit Perth. Do you remember all of that? Who do we sue if we get hit?
Yeah, there have been lots of collisions up there, and sometimes they have been, or there's been return to Earth damage caused, and countries negotiate that. There's obligations under international law to try and mediate and arbitrate those decisions as to how and who was responsible and what compensation should be paid. And there are a number of cases where that has occurred. There's also been attempts by some countries to blow up their surplus to requirements, I suppose, and again that can cause fragmentation and lots of little bits of junk to run around. So
would that be illegal, Vicki? Would that be illegal if there's somebody to?
Well, it's now been decided. Countries have now realised that this is something that is potentially damaging and doesn't really resolve the problem. So there's a lot of work. I mean, as people look into whether they want to be able to put settlements, there need to be consideration about how the military is involved in that. And all of those questions, as things become more valuable. So, for example, people talk about mining satellites, that is meteorites and things up there that might have an enormous number of metal or valuable product in them. which anybody here on Earth is going to have to sort of make a decision about stacking up the cost of these things, of course.
Yes.
But communications has been a huge, ever since we've had the telegraph, we've had enormous advances in communications, and it's been worthwhile. So, Optus and everyone else is out there and is in there, of course, wanting to provide a product for people to be able to store their data, transfer data, communicate, etc. Mobile phones are a big invention of the sort of
Vicki, Les Alicus here.
So,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just with regard to ownership, I mean, here on Mother Terra Firma, we have, and you were the Attorney General here in South Australia, and a lawyer, so well versed in these issues. We have title deeds and ownership laws. So are we potentially starting another colonist revolution? And I refer to Australia versus the Indigenous people. Is it a case of first in, best dressed? If you go up to the moon or you land on an asteroid and you plant a flag, suddenly you declare that to be yours because, let's say, the Chinese, with their behaviour, they seem to want to own the South China Sea, whereas other countries are on the perimeter of it as well. So what are the technical law issues when you go to a place in outer space, and what does the international law prescribe in terms of ownership, or is it just first in, best dressed?
It's intergalactic law. Not
essentially, I suppose we've had the Antarctica as an example of what we do in an area which is internationally significant. I think there's something like 40-odd different country settlements down there, and they agree to an area of space that they're on. There's the Antarctic Treaty. There's no sovereignty in relation to like we would do in land or oceans. So we've got a few precedents of things that we can sort of look at as to how we do it. And because the Antarctica, beautiful as it may be, is a very hostile environment for human habitation, so there's a very high reliance on helping each other, inspecting each other's premises to see that they're not breaking any of the rules about not having military bases, all those sorts of things.
But there is but Vicki, there is a great emphasis on going there and staking a claim. It's quite sort of territorial. We own this bit and they own that bit and somebody else owns the other bit over there. I mean, it's almost, like colonising, isn't it? I mean, just go along, stick your flag in the ground and you got it.
Australia in the 1930s declared itself in its own statutes in the Commonwealth Parliament that it would own a certain section of Antarctica. The United States just completely ignores that, and a number of other countries do too.
Is that legal?
The fact is
that legal?
Well, again, it's just not recognised. So therefore, that doesn't help much. You can pass a law saying I'm the king of the castle or I'm the king of Kangaroo Island, but that doesn't mean it's actually valid, right? So enforceable. Let me say enforceable. So the fact is, though, that it's a very good question, though, that you ask about sovereignty. So in space law and international law at the moment, generally, you can't go and put a stake down and put a claim. There's a flag apparently still sitting up on the moon when Neil Armstrong walked there and sort of left his footprints, etc. And there's talk about, heritage law and whether we should, in areas like that, first man on the moon, etc., do preserve those sorts of things. But the property law as such is very different of course, on Earth. And so we're not going to have a Torrens title system soon occupying or providing the base for areas of stakeholders' interests in the moon.
Vicki, a hypothetical, if you wouldn't mind. What happens if there is a murder on the International Space Station?
Yep, okay.
What do you do?
Largely the country responsible is, or alleged to be responsible, is bound to deal with the offender. All right, and again, we've had situations in the Antarctic where there's been alleged murders, where there's been assaults, there's been stealing of property, etc. So there's between civilians, and you imagine people get a bit bored sometimes down there, but they will have that you need to be able to manage the law. So there's no question, criminal law, environment law, heritage law, the question of leasehold or some kind of capacity to be able to sort of put down a base for your research, things such as zones around them to ensure that you don't bump into someone else, because, again, there's lots of different obligations and there's lots of different risks up there in space. So just looking at the moon, I expect that the international law, which is, is a sort of a bit like the sort of 10 Commandments of space, about the obligations between countries who, bump up against each other in their objective. And as commercial interests develop, these are things that we're going to have to work on. So from my perspective, even though, yes, criminal law is relevant, murders, and there's, people have even written books about murders on the moon. It's a very real part of our human responsibilities and protections that we need to look at. But how's that going to apply in space, and what role will different agencies have, and what obligations will you have to? So, for example, there's a moon treaty that Australia's signed up to, and that requires you to rescue an astronaut in distress. Well, if that's a enemy soldier, should that person be rescued? Well, these are the sorts of things that obviously the lawyers and the academics are all looking at, and how we best deal with it. So the University of South Australia, there's University of South Australia, Adelaide University the University in South Australia, namely the Adelaide University, has introduced a postgraduate professional certificate in commercial space law, and I'd certainly been encouraging the university when in the Parliament to give an opportunity for this fourth frontier to be available and accessible to South Australian lawyers. We're the estate that is the home of the Australian Space Agency, and of course we would like that to be. And to me, it's a great new opportunity for the next generation.
Vicki, have you got
45 years in the law, but so I've done the course. Are you there?
Yeah, and this must be a much more, interesting, pioneering part of the law. Have you got any clients yet?
No, well, it's not my objective to go into practice and set up a shingle. There are people in South Australia already who give advice on to companies and agencies who want to launch satellites or set up a satellite launching pad and those sorts of things. So there are some people working in this field, and they do work at an international level. They're international lawyers.
You do mention, Vicki, that it seems to me there's a potpourri of jurisdictions, and every country might have its own objectives and own laws. Is there in the world an ultimate arbitrator who anyone can go to and get a final decision made about a question?
A space high court, yeah.
Again, there are obligations at the treaty level to attempt to mediate. If you can't mediate, let me give you an example. The United States is quite advanced in contracting people to do things. So people like Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musk of the world, they bid for contracts to do things for NASA, to train their astronauts, to travel and deliver people up and back to the space station, the International Space Station, and to provide services. And when they miss out on a contract, they rush off to the United States Supreme Court and they battle out that issue, obviously in a litigious way. And it is, we're talking billions of dollars worth of contracts. So they're worth fighting over, I suppose, and that's what they do.
Well, here, much closer to home, Vicki, you might just have your first client with me. I don't know how to tell you this after listening to what you've said. Some years ago, I found this guy in New York, and you won't laugh, I hope. He sold me 1 square foot on the surface of the moon. And his company was called Surreal Estate, and it cost me $15. Have I been scammed, and what can I do about it?
Yes, well, you've definitely been scammed. First, you'd have to find the person who sold it to you, which is a bit like a Nigerian bank scam, you know. So
it seemed irresistible. You could own real estate on the moon, and it's just going to cost you $15. Not a lot of real estate, you understand, square foot. But, I thought it was a good... He sent me a certificate. I mean, will that help?
Well, can I just say
I've even framed it.
Well, good. Yes, well, I thought you were smarter than that, Jeremy, but it's fun to do those sorts of things. But nevertheless, can I say that it's terrific that the Adelaide University has sort of taken this up. We had our first lot of graduates do it. I said to the university, I'd been on a trip out to Africa, and I came back and I said, look, if you're doing it, I'll sign up to it. It was done over 2022-23, and it was. I'm still yet to get a piece of parchment that actually says I've passed it, but they'll be having some ceremony later this year. So the plan is to try and offer courses in military space law, commercial space law, to provide it for the next generation. I mean, at the moment, it's trying to help train up people to be able to work out rules. I mean, you can imagine, for example, there's an enormous commercial interest and research going on about production of food in space, utilisation of fuel, recycling of water. I mean, you name it. There's lots of things that are going on in the space industry world, apart from just building satellites and sending them up there.
Yeah.
And so there's a massive amount of laws that have to be really agreed upon to be able to catch up. And you mentioned about the law coming, from behind and so on. I mean, parliaments need to look at these things ultimately, but it is, I think, important for the profession to get up to speed. Obviously, we rely significantly on those who are doing academic research in these areas to try and provide the best options for what direction we go in. But there's no question one of the most pressing things that's there on the basis that there are countries already developing and exploring and sending up modules to the moon to look at having the option to mine ice up there for the purpose. Now, I think China found it first, but nevertheless there's an opportunity. And what that can do is if you break it down, it can create hydrogen, and then that can help whoever wants to then go on to Mars, because this is another thing that they're looking at too.
It's a brave new world, Vicki. Lovely to talk to you. Have a great time over on Kangaroo Island. When do you get back? Or you're not?
Well, I'll be back after next week. At the end of next week is the Kangaroo Island Cup, which is I'm a patron for.
Yes.
The annual race meeting here. And so in the meantime, there's a few jobs to be done around the property and so on. So my son's got cattle over here now, so it's an interesting time. But nevertheless, it's been can I just conclude on that by saying that for me, the great opportunity is the future. And I encourage young people, and I was really pleased in political time to actually go to a graduation of students and find people who come up to me and say afterwards, I'm enrolling in law, I'm going to look at space law, I'm going to become a space engineer. So there's obviously other profession and opportunities there. Yeah. And that's great. And it's certainly another area which I think is really it's the fourth frontier, and it's for the next generation. So that's my objective, is to try and do whatever I can to help promote both universities and industry, get into the international market.
Wonderful, Vicki. To infinity and beyond. Why
Absolutely.
not? Absolutely.
Well, I don't think you're going to get much return on your one square inch on the back.
Okay, I'll tell you what, Vicki.
Good luck with that.
Thank you, Vicki. All the best. Thanks for coming on the show.
Okay, cheers.
All the best. All the best. Now, the funny thing, I think what I'll do is to probably, as I've got the title, I've got the deed to 1 square foot of the surface of the moon. I think before all this space law starts to become more popular and more widely known, I think I probably should sell it, put a little price on my $15 that it cost me, and then move it on for, say, $25. I think that would work.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.